He was once dismissed as too weak to compete, booed by crowds for his fiery celebrations, and hounded by the press over a racism scandal that threatened to define him. But that very man, scrappy, stubborn, and defiant, became the youngest world #1 in ATP history, defeated the legendary Pete Sampras, and rewrote the story of Australian tennis pride. Lleyton Hewitt was never afraid to live big. $1 million mansion in Melbourne, a beachfront apartment in Sydney, a fleet of Ferraris and Bentleys, and luxurious getaways across the globe. So how did someone so often scorn and criticize transform raw talent, burning arrogance, and even his worst controversies into a financial empire and a dominant force in the tennis world? This is the story of the boy who was once Australia's greatest hope and greatest headache, Lleyton Hewitt. Born on February 24th, 1981, in Adelaide, South Australia, Lleyton Glenn Hewitt didn't grow up surrounded by wealth, but from his very first breath, he was wrapped in something far more valuable, an unbreakable sporting spirit. His father, Glenn Hewitt, was a celebrated rugby player who competed for Port Adelaide in the SANFL, embodying the iron discipline and battlefield resilience of a true champion. His mother, Lleyton Hewitt, was a physical education teacher and coach who poured her heart into shaping young athletes. In their small home filled with trophies and worn-out sports gear, these two remarkable people made their firstborn son a promise. If you want to win, you must become someone who never gives up. Lleyton also had a younger brother, Jamon, who later played tennis and became a coach, proving the sporting gene flowed powerfully through their bloodline. But it was Lleyton, with his slight frame and gentle face, who faced the most doubt from the very beginning. At age 5, he followed his father to rugby practice, his tiny shoes barely keeping up with a ball twice his size. Glenn once imagined his son might follow his own path on the rugby field, but the tennis racket in Lleyton's hands soon proved otherwise. At just 7 years old, Lleyton began regular tennis training under the scorching South Australian sun. Older opponents mocked his scrawny build and spindly arms. Some told him bluntly, "You'll never play professionally. Stop dreaming." Those taunts didn't break him. They built him. From his very first swing, Lleyton Hewitt was a fighter who refused to retreat when pushed to the edge. At 12, in a national junior tournament, Lleyton suffered a crushing defeat. Eliminated early, missing the championship he had dreamed about, he heard the whispers, "It's hopeless." He cried. He wanted to quit. The humiliation was nearly too much for a child burning with ambition. But his mother, a woman of steel with determined eyes, pulled him close and whispered words that would change everything. "If you want to win, make people talk about your heart, not your muscles." That single sentence rewrote the direction of Lleyton Hewitt's entire life. He returned to the court with relentless energy, carving out a life principle that would carry him to the very top. As long as you have a brave heart, everything else will follow. At 15, Lleyton caused a shockwave when he won an ATP qualifying match in his hometown of Adelaide, while still a high school student. Just 1 year later, the boy everyone had ridiculed defeated Andre Agassi, a living tennis legend, in an international tournament before he was even old enough to hold a driver's license. But Hewitt's childhood wasn't built on miraculous swings alone. It was built on waking up at 5 a.m. for grueling long runs, coming home at night with blistered hands, surviving thousands of falls on concrete courts, and swallowing hundreds of losses in silence before learning to rise again. A child forged in a sporting family, with an iron will from his very first breath. That was who Lleyton Hewitt was, and that spirit would propel him to the dazzling heights of world tennis. At 17, Lleyton Hewitt officially turned professional in 1998. But even before that, in 1997, while still finishing high school, this diminutive teenager stunned all of Australia by defeating Andre Agassi at the Adelaide International. That victory signaled the explosive arrival of a different kind of star, one defined by reckless courage and extraordinary endurance rather than size or raw power. On the ATP Tour, Hewitt chose a style built on tenacity, running down every ball, counterattacking with precision, and fighting for each and every point like a man who simply refused to let go of a match. Australian fans went wild for his signature celebrations, his thunderous "come on," shouts echoing across courts like declarations of war. To some opponents, that fire was controversial, too aggressive, too provocative. To Hewitt, it was survival. His peak arrived with breathtaking speed. In 2001, at just 20 years old, he defeated Pete Sampras to claim the U.S. Open title, then became the youngest world #1 in ATP history. A year later, he cemented his legend by winning Wimbledon 2002, defeating David Nalbandian in the final, then closing the season as world #1 once again. Between 2001 and 2002, Hewitt held the top ranking for a staggering 75 weeks, becoming the defining icon of Australian tennis after the Pat Rafter era. Wearing the national colors, he helped Australia win 2 Davis Cup championships in 1999 and 2003, pouring his almost indestructible fighting spirit into every rubber he played. But fame brought fierce challenges. At the 2001 U.S. Open, Hewitt landed in serious controversy when he complained to an umpire about an African-American linesman in a way that suggested racial bias. The international media immediately condemned it. Hewitt later issued an explanation, and the incident eventually subsided, but the stain lingered on his reputation for years. He also clashed repeatedly with the ATP over mandatory media obligations, flatly refusing to attend press conferences and accepting fines without apology. Reporters labeled him the most difficult player of his generation. On court, he publicly mocked Novak Djokovic for allegedly faking injuries and had countless heated exchanges with umpires and opponents. Off court, tabloids reported a 2006 affair scandal while his wife was pregnant, allegations both he and Beck denied fiercely. The Hewitt-Cartwright couple presented a united front, and the storm eventually passed. Entering 2004, injuries began to chip away at Hewitt's body. Hip and foot problems dragged him through several difficult seasons. Yet he still battled his way to the Australian Open final in 2005 and continued competing at an elite level until 2016, when he officially retired at the Australian Open to a standing ovation from a Melbourne park crowd, a thundering thank you for more than 2 decades of pure dedication. Lleyton Hewitt met Beck Cartwright in 2004 at a charity event in Sydney, just weeks after ending his engagement to Belgian tennis player Kim Clijsters. Less than 6 weeks after meeting Beck, Hewitt proposed. It was impulsive, bold, and completely on-brand. Their wedding in July 2005 at the Sydney Opera House was a true cultural spectacle. The world of professional tennis shaking hands with the world of showbiz, witnessed by hundreds of reporters and fans.